you have all these mechanics and engineers and all this brain trust of how to structure the organization. How did Jeff fit into that puzzle, and how big of a part was Jeff of development of what was better or worse, or did you guys just plug him in there and say, hey, drive it?
Kevin, I'll tell you, through my years at IROC, dealing with Foyts, Andretti, Unsers, the Formula One guys, Moss, Hicks, Bell, all those guys, they all have something special. They feel something different. And you have this too, right? You're one of those guys that drive out of a bigger windshield. And that's the way Jeff Gordon was. We kid Jeff to this day, like he's not allowed to touch tools or whatever. He's learning, right? He didn't know one thing from another, but he could give you a lap as good as any computer. He made it so easy for me to change the car or adjust it. He would tell me things like, when I get off in the corner there, I feel like the weight transfers from this wheel, it's over on this wheel, it gets a plant, and then it rolls back here. So picking apart the, like shocks and aero and stuff like that was incredibly easy because he would give such detail. And I do talk about that in the book, like from Friday to Sunday, I can never complain about, Jeff not being involved, not being whatever, because with the team, he left it up to me. But I don't know that at that time, without having onboard data, that I could have ever worked with anybody better than him.
I have told several people that because when I came to Stewart-Haas Racing, our alliance was with Hendrick Motorsports. And we immediately realized that Jeff was the car that we looked at because we could see all the things that were going on. So we developed this relationship with how we looked at things and with myself and Rodney and Alan and everything that was happening at Hendrick Motorsports at that particular time. But one of the things that I always tell people, when Jimmy Johnson started to not have the results that he had, it was because Jeff Gordon left. And I truly believe that because I felt like when I got to Stewart-Haas Racing that Jeff Gordon was the reason. He was the one that pushed all the buttons, whether it was in the engine shop or the chassis shop or the engineering department or whatever was off at that particular point. And what you just said pretty much verifies what I saw, because I just felt like Jeff was always the one that could make that department get better and help them, guide them. And I think that's a piece that a lot of drivers don't realize, is how much they guide the ship with the things that they say and what they relate to the people, because we're problem solvers. But I always felt like when Jeff left, that was the biggest problem that Jimmy had, because of the fact he had never had to really develop anything at Hendrick Motorsports, because Jeff was so ingrained with what you guys did, and that carried all the way through. And I don't know what you think about that comment, Jeff was an integral part of the way that things progressed.
And he it's not like he was going to go to the fab shop and say, we need to do this, but he was so good about analyzing what he felt. And, as we talked about bigger windshield, meaning, race drivers, great race drivers like yourself, have a different view of time. Let's just say, and I've always said this, they asked about Michael Jordan, and if it's a different view of time. They can compute so much more in time. Like when I'm driving, I'm doing everything I can do to save my life and not crash, right?
Yeah.
That's my job, right? That's when I'm out there. So I come in and somebody else got to fix my car, right? But with guys like you, with Jeff, so analytical. And, when you talk about a guy like Jimmy was just bad, fast driver, but
Hammer down.
as Jimmy was used to the trucks and all that stuff. Like he learned a lot of travel, and the lower they got those cars and the less they traveled, I think it was harder for him. And I think there were some people it helped, and some people, it hurt. But that transition period of a car going from, let's say, static to straightaway to being loaded up in the corner, and then it loads up here and it changes here in transition and it changes again. That's something Jeff Gordon could pick out like unbelievable. And to me, that was everything about setting the car up. The only problem we ever had with that was his rookie year, like at Rockingham. He's like, tighten the middle. And I'm like, man, I can't tighten the middle. And then I'm just terribly loose off. Tighten the middle. I said, look, walk me down here and show me, because I don't understand. We walk down in the corner of 1 and 2 at Rockingham there, and I forget, there's a sign, like it was a sponsor sign, and it's right smack in the middle of the corner. And he says,
it was a Winston
right there,
Cup sign.
right here on entry. I was like, whoa. That's not entry. That's the middle. He looks at me, goes, no, that's entry, because that's where I let off. I said, well, maybe that's the problem. The rest of the guys are letting off back here. So once we got on that, it was easier to fix the car.
Yeah. And that's a trust thing. And that's the thing that crew chiefs and drivers that trust each other, because we've had a lot of conversations about Chris Gabehart and Denny Hamlin lately. And if Chris Gabehart tells Denny Hamlin to drive it off of a cliff, he's going to drive it off of a cliff. And there's just when you have that crew chief driver team relationship that is at its peak, it's when the driver doesn't get mad that he's being told that he's doing something wrong. It's when the crew chief doesn't get mad that the driver's telling him he's doing something wrong, because they have that trust in each other that you can't buy and you can't create. It's not something that you can just turn on and off. And that, when you tell Jeff that he's driving in too far, I bet he went out there the next time and just let off sooner, didn't he?
A little bit. Then he'd go back into. But I used to have to take him down and watch other people. Like if someone was faster than him, I was like, watch where he's letting off.
Yeah.
Like Martinsville, it took us years to do that, and he finally, boom, it clicked. That communication, that trust, honesty, respect, that thing that's strong, makes a strong relationship, whether that's your family or your wife, whether your teammate. But that is very important, because as much as I thought I knew, or the much I would do, if he said I didn't like that, even if I was really sure it was going to work or be better, I wouldn't put it in, because he didn't like it, which mean it wasn't going to be better. And I'd have to find another way to give him that feeling without doing that. He hated moving the Pannard bar. You got to ask him about this. Like I would raise the Pannard bar one round, which is like 60 thousandths across the rear end, which is nothing, right? And he'd be like, no, it's too much. Go a half a round. I was like, that's nothing. He's I can feel it, and I'm like, okay, but I had to give him what he wanted. And in his mind, if I went ahead and raised that track bar, then he knew I wouldn't have faith in him when I did, so I had to listen to him.
What was the best BS story you ever told Jeff Gordon on the radio that turned out pretty good?
Oh, I don't know if it turned out good. We had when, as he's coming up, and of course I'm coaching, you want to be positive and whatever. Yeah. And I remember we were Atlanta somewhere, we're running like terrible. And I was like, no, I was like, your lap times are good. Like those guys are, they're all backing up to you. And he pushes the button. He's like, Ray, why is it that you tell me that all time, that I'm catching them and I can see them driving away out the windshield, And another time we had a little blowout on the radio at Vegas. And it was kind of funny, because we couldn't stay angry. Like after the race, he'd come in and he'd look at me like a kid, like my little brother, he's a little kid, and I would laugh or he would laugh. So we would just start laughing. But that day the Tauruses were kicking our butt. Man, they were killing us, right? When we weren't used to that. In 98, when they came out with that Taurus, and we're back there running like 11th, which, in
the world.
He's screaming this, that, and oh my God. And I said, okay, then come in and we'll pit. We can't pit. If we pit, we'll go a lap down. I said, well, then shut up and drive it, because I can't run alongside it and fix it. And then he didn't say another word to me. Like, he picked up probably a couple tenths for a little bit, but he didn't say, and afterwards he's like, and I just laughed at him. I was like, bud, what do you want to do? They kicked our butt, like we got beat. Like we didn't make a top 10 today.
One of my coolest career moments was actually at Vegas, because if you remember, I think it was probably 2000. We would go out there and they just let the Busch cars and the Cup cars go out there together when they would have the open test. Uh-huh. The first car that passed me was Jeff Gordon. I thought, man, I have absolutely made it. I'm on the same racetrack as Jeff Gordon.
Hey, race fans, thanks for watching our video. For all NASCAR on Fox News content and the best clips from Fox Sports, be sure to follow and subscribe to our channel.